Good evening, everybody. My name's Mick, and I am an alcoholic, and I'm serving as your secretary this evening. Please join us for a moment's silence to remember the still suffering alcoholic inside and outside this meeting. Thank you very much. And Tony's going to read the preamble. Over to you, Tony.
Tony, I'm an alcoholic. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. AA has no dues or fees. It is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Thanks very much, Tone. A very warm welcome goes out to any newcomer or anyone returning to Alcoholics Anonymous for the meeting host. All right. I believe we've got Harish tonight who's going to do his story with us. Harish, you've got 40 to 45 minutes to share. Right. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, mate.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me tonight to speak here. I don't know if I'll be able to speak for 45 minutes. I normally do about 25 minutes. Obviously my stories are like a bit rehearsed. Anyway, my name is Harish. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic, grateful to be an alcoholic, and the best thing that's ever happened to me is that I became an alcoholic. Had I heard that at my first meeting, I thought, you guys are crazy. The best thing I've ever done is come to Alcoholics Anonymous, and the second best thing I've done is to stay. As you can tell from my tan and from my name, I'm from Indian origin. I'm the youngest of 9 brothers, and I also had 6 sisters. My father was not an alcoholic, but with the number of kids he had, he might have had another obsession. I'll let you decide what that could possibly be. I was brought up in a Hindu home, educated in a Jewish school, and then traumatized with the Christian brothers at a primary school. Obviously, this influenced me a lot when I got into Alcoholics Anonymous. My early recollections of it as a child were always having a state of fear, anxiety, and not feeling good enough. I was sexually abused, and I was emotionally neglected, not emotionally abused. I was emotionally neglected. And I always had this feeling of not being good enough. My parents used to entertain quite a lot at home. And I recall at dinner parties, I was always the young kid who picked up the leftovers of the drinks that were left, so the last of the liqueur glasses, the last of the whiskey glasses. And my father's best friend used to call me an Ashain. Ashain in Indian means drunk, and hadn't started real drinking yet. So he must have been a clairvoyant because he knew what was to come. Like I said, my emotional and psychological makeup before I picked up a drink were not really that good, or anxiety, fear always dominated my life. And I recall, I liked many things in my life, but I distinctly remember the first drink I had at a school social at the grammar school. And when that first drink went down my throat, down my esophagus, and hit the pit of my stomach, for the first time in my life, I felt like I thought normal people felt, whatever that may be. Those feelings of inadequacy and fears diminished. Now, I can't relate to people in Alcoholics Anonymous who say they went from social drinking to alcoholic drinking. I drank obsessively and excessively from the word go. And what makes me an alcoholic at a very simplistic level is this. Once I ingest any alcohol into my system, I can't consistently predict how much I'm going to drink, and I can't consistently predict how I'm going to behave. If I could do either of those two things, I wouldn't be in Alcoholics Anonymous. For me, that phrase "to drink is to die" doesn't really, doesn't touch me so much, because I'm going to die anyway. It's just the way that alcoholism kills you. The degradation and the humiliation that alcohol administered in my life was horrendous. I often say, and I don't mean this to people who have relapsed. Thanks God I have not relapsed since I came to the program, but I rather put a gun to my head than pick up another drink because I couldn't stand like I said, the humiliation and the degradation that alcohol administered in my life. So the first few years of my drinking, there were no major consequences. I used to get drunk. My friends used to take me home. They got drunk. I used to take them home, and that's the way it went. I wasn't very successful with the ladies because I was petrified of rejection. And, also I saw myself as the ugly duckling. So I never really risked. I would peacock around women, but I never had the guts to ask a lady out. The couple of ladies that I went out with, chose me rather than me choose them. At the age of 18, I got my driving license. Well, the way I got my driving license was I bribed the guy 80 quid. That's the way we used to do it in those days. And I got my driving license. And in the first 6 months of getting my license, I had 3 car accidents. But my illness is such that I couldn't connect my drinking to the consequences. I just thought I was somebody with bad luck. It was always bad luck, It wasn't the drinking, I just couldn't see the connection between these two. Eventually, sorry, I'm just going to close this. Eventually, I did meet a lady who would later become my wife at my local pub. And I don't mean this with any disrespect, but I was so starved for affection. Had any woman given herself sexually or emotionally to me, I would have hung on like a bloody leech. Because I was so needy and I was just starved for affection. And what initially started as a great romance ended in the worst nightmare that any human being should go through, because that it describes in the big book. I was a Jekyll and Hyde. I was a true Jekyll and Hyde. I was Jack the Lad in the pub, and at home I was a bloody terror. I was a bloody terror. And you know, page 82 of the big book says the alcoholic is like a tornado running through the life of others. Sweet relationships are all words to that effect. And what makes me pathetic as an active alcoholic is that my primary relationship is not with a human being, but with a chemical. As much as I said I love my wife and my kids, alcohol always came first, So I never understood what was happening. Most of my drinking life was characterized by guilt and shame and remorse. And I had my own private national anthem. And my national anthem was, I promise I will never do it again. And 2 days later, I was at it again and again and again and again. See, because I have a type of mind that only remembers what alcohol does for me, not to me. It forgets the humiliation, the degradation. And then I meet my friend Mick 3 days later and say, we'll have a half this time. It says in chapter 3, it says the great obsession of every abnormal drinker is that someday, somehow, he'll be able to control and enjoy his drinking. Many pursue it to the gates of insanity or death. And that I tried every conceivable way to drink like a gentleman, because somewhere in my head, I thought that one day, I would be a sophisticated person and, go out for a fancy meal and ask for the right wine and end up with a nice brandy. And then what happened was actually just finished up laying on barrels at the end of a bar, but I did try every conceivable way to drink like a gentleman. I'm not going to go into every single war story that I had, but there's 2 things that always stick in my mind's eye. And that is, when I say alcohol will take you to places where you don't want to go, alcohol will take you to places where you don't want to go. I often smile when newcomers say, oh, I haven't done that, not yet. Because as a child, I had a moral compass, but as my drinking went, as my drinking progressed, not only did my drinking get worse, but my moral compass went out of the window. What was not acceptable one time started becoming acceptable. The dishonesty which manifested in many ways in lying, in cheating, in excuses, in justification, in rationalization, And the closest to mental illness, I think, is self-deception. I tried all those games. I mean, how do you treat an illness with its primary symptom is denial, and then it defends itself till the very end with dishonesty, manifested in the ways I've just said. Anyway, like I said, there were two things that always stick in my mind's eye, and one was, in one of my blackouts, I had my 4-year-old daughter hanging out of a 4-story balcony, and I could have killed that child and not known about it. And the other thing was, the 9 months before I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, my wife had tried to commit suicide because living with me had become unbearable. Because, Bill W. writes in his writings that anybody who lives with an alcoholic is mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and sometimes physically affected. It's impossible not to live with us and not be affected in some sort of way. And that's why we have our sister fellowship, Al-Anon or Alateen or ACOA, because the amount of damage we do is horrendous. And we don't, I certainly didn't do damage because I wanted to. What I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous was that we're not bad people trying to be good. We're sick people trying to get well, and that was very important. And although I am not responsible for having an illness, I am responsible for my recovery, and I've got to take full responsibility for the consequences of such. Anyway, I think it was the end of 1985, beginning of 1986, when my wife had tried to commit suicide, I begged her, please don't tell a psychiatrist what I do when I drink. I said, I won't drink no more whiskey, because in my head, I thought a whiskey was the problem. So my drinking was not mentioned as far as I recall. And when the psychiatrist interviewed both of us, I just said, when he asked me, what do you think is wrong in the relationship? And I said, well, there wasn't enough sex. I was very young. I was 26, 27 years old at the time. And that was my excuse. So he suggested that my wife go to London and take a break from me for a month and then sort of try to reignite the relationship after a month. And during the time she was away, my pattern was every night I used to buy myself a bottle of Black Label, and I would put it in a little coffee table beside my armchair. And in those days, it was cassettes. And I used to put the old romantic songs, still by the Commodores. I think Mozzie knows what I'm talking about. And I would rewind the songs, pour myself a scotch, cry, rewind the song again, make the pain deeper, and do this process till I passed out. See, my illness is such, I couldn't see past my nose. It wasn't about my wife. It was about poor little Harish. Everybody's left me, and I didn't understand. Prior to this, my friends had already started to ostracize me. I was becoming more isolated because I displayed very antisocial behavior. When my wife returned after a month, we, under the psychiatrist's recommendations, he said to try to reignite the fellowship, the relationship. Excuse me just a sec. And the first night she came back, we all got dressed up and went out with another couple for a meal. And what initially started as an okay night and a romantic night, I drank at a restaurant. Then I went to a discotheque. I went to another discotheque, and the last thing I remember is that I hit the barman at the discotheque, and then I passed out and I was thrown in the back of the car. And I am told by my colleagues and my friends that Gibraltar is a very small place, and my wife got out of the car, jumped out of the car about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, shouting down the local main street, shouting, "I'm not going back with that effing animal. I'm not going back with that effing animal." And she had just had a break for a month, keeping away from me under the psychiatrist's suggestion. So, the relationship was really, really, was dying, was breaking. There was a coldness at home. And yeah, it was horrendous. And one of the nights, well, after this, one night I went out with some friends, and some of the friends suggested that we go to a brothel. Now, up to that point, I had never been unfaithful to my wife, and I didn't know what a bloody brothel was. I was 27 years old, and we went, and again, I used to get these blackouts at the most inappropriate moments. But what happened next was, then the following morning, my wife just looked at me and said, "You know what you did last night?" And I said, "What did I do last night?" She said, "You told me to hold you. I came up about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, and then you went to describe what you did with this prostitute, and that was the last nails in the coffin." I was just baffled. I would wake up in the morning. The consequences were coming up so often, but I had a sense of impending doom, because I knew, the consequences were coming so quickly and nothing good was happening in my life, but I just didn't know what to do. I just didn't know what to do. I always woke up with a lot of fear, and I didn't know where to ask for help or what, I didn't know what was happening. So towards the summer of 1986, I found out that my wife was having an affair with a guy I used to hang around with. And I'm not going to go into every detail, but there was a scuffle. I followed this guy with a kitchen knife and I broke into his house. And then my wife ran away from the house that evening with one of my children. And the following morning, a sergeant and 2 cops came for my other child who had been left behind. And they said, "We've come for the safety of your child," because I was quite a violent drunk. And I felt totally humiliated because my family wasn't the sort of family that got in trouble with the law. And the building where I lived was I did business, the people I used to do business with were the owners of the building. So now my secret was out, for the first time now. And I didn't know what to do. Funnily enough, a friend arrived from London, a very good friend of mine who was actually the best man at my wedding. And I said, "I need help." But I didn't want to see a psychiatrist or psychologist in Gibraltar because then everybody was going to know I was nuts. Everybody probably knew except me, So I went over to London and we arranged to see a psychologist. My friend's house was always full with booze, so I would drink before seeing the psychologist and I would have a few drinks after seeing the psychologist. But I remember the first time I met the psychologist, I even remember his name 40 years on, Dr. Tideman. I was riddled with guilt and shame at this point. And I had what I call my first emotional vomit. I can't remember what I told him, but I told him of a lot of stuff which I felt guilty and ashamed of. So, but that didn't stop me drinking. And on the second meeting that I had with this gentleman, he asked me what I thought was a very strange question. And he says, "Mr. Virumal, do you drink a lot?" And I said, this is an alcoholic answer. I said, "I'm drinking a lot because my wife has left me. Not my wife has left me because I drink a lot." So unwittingly, I was choosing the words as, as I did. So after seeing him for 5 or 6 sessions, I don't think he ever explained what alcoholism was, but he just told me, because although my wife had been unfaithful, I wanted to reconcile. He said, "I'd say either the wife or you're drinking," but that he didn't tell me what to do about it. So he prescribed antabuse, and I told him that I wanted to be back in Gibraltar for the 14th of September. 1980, yeah, I wanted to come back to the 14th of September because it was my daughter's birthday. And hopefully that was when I had my last drink. That's next month, in 30 days time, it will be 40 years, but I was baffled because I came back and I told my then wife, I said, the psychologist has told me I've got a drinking problem. And she says, "Yes, but you're drunk." And I just looked at her like a bloody idiot. And I said, "Well, I didn't know what to do with this information. He said I got a drinking problem, but I didn't know what to do with it. I was still getting pissed." So I think it was the following day I went to my GP and I was no longer in denial. And I asked him, I told him exactly what happened when I drank. I was honest and I just told him what happened when I drank. And he said, "Harish, why didn't you go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous?" And I felt quite insulted because I was manager of a business and I was secretary of a sporting association. I thought, how could I possibly be an alcoholic? Because I had preconceived ideas of what an alcoholic was. But I was in so much emotional pain that I conceded to meeting one of you guys on a one-to-one. I wouldn't go to a meeting, but I wouldn't mind, you know. So when the guy called me up, he said, you know, I told him, meet me at we'll meet at the Angry Friar, because I thought, you know, we would have a couple of pints and talk about this, you know. It wasn't very difficult to identify me. I told him I was Indian, so he waited outside the Angry Friar and he says, Harish, we're not going to go in here. We're going to go across the road to King's Chapel. So King's Chapel, very appropriately, the meetings we held then were in nursery chairs, you know, and he just sat there. And when this guy started telling me his story, I thought, this bastard has been speaking to my wife, because everything he's done, I've done. And if he says he's an alcoholic, I must be one too. And the point of identification was straight away. Neither the psychologist nor the psychiatrist had made an impression on me. And this guy, who was just as illiterate as I was at the time, I could relate to him straight away. And he's told me just three very simple things. He said, Harish, if you don't pick up the first drink, you don't get drunk. Come to meetings and ask for help. Now, you've got to understand that the AA that I got brought up in 40 years ago, nobody read the big book. You know, nobody read any of the literature. It was just, you know, come to meetings, don't drink. Come to meetings, don't drink. So it's a miracle that I'm sober. You know, I know that today you have people who take you through the big book, but there was nothing like that at the time, you know. But I thought the deal was, when I came here, that I just stopped drinking and everything would be all right. In a vision for you in chapter 11, it says, there comes a point in time in the life of the alcoholic where he cannot see life with alcohol or without it. He's at the jumping off place. You know, oftentimes, you know, I was not drinking, and oftentimes some of the older members used to say, Harish, how are you? And I would say, I'm fine. And I would go home, put the covers over my head and cry like a child, because I was in so much emotional pain and I didn't know what was wrong. You know, I didn't know what was wrong. The only time I contemplated taking my life wasn't when I was drinking, is when I got sober. You know, the emotions just overwhelmed me, the fear, the resentments. You know, I had that fear of impending doom, and I was so angry as well. They say the two main symptoms of somebody who's spiritually sick is fear and resentments, just full of fear and full of resentments. And that's precisely how I was. So, you know, it was through the pain of being sober that I had to look at these steps to some degree. Like I said, though I didn't do it through the direct route, it was through the scenic route, if you like. I had to suffer a lot of pain before I looked at the program. So what's happened in these last 40 years? They say that God gives his strongest soldiers the biggest battles. Well, I think God must think I'm the Indian version of Rambo, because I'm not saying I'm special or different, but I've had enough adversities in my sobriety, things that would have let me go back to the bottle in the past, because it would have been the best excuses for going back to drink. Out of those 7 brothers that have died, 4 of them have died as a direct consequence of alcoholism. Well, I was 2 years sober when my younger brother, well, not my younger brother, he was 4 years older than me. He committed suicide. Another brother died of cirrhosis of the liver. Another died of cancer, also related to this illness. And I managed to 12-step one of my brothers, and he stayed sober for 15 years before his death in 2010. You know, my mother died. She had both legs amputated before her death. My father died 5 days before my sister's wedding. You know, I've had a lot of grief in my recovery. I also had a 38-year-old girlfriend who died in 1997. In 1997, I've been through various bad patches in my recovery. And I don't want to make this sound like doom and gloom, because people who know me, I like to mess around, but I take my recovery very seriously. But adversities do strike. And in 1997, in May 1997, I was forced out of the family business. That was in May 97. On the 15th of October, my then girlfriend died. A few weeks later, I was misdiagnosed with hepatitis C. And then I was told that my eldest daughter had suffered sexual abuse from the stepfather, all within a period of 10 months. And a lot of people thought that my recovery was really precarious. But I learned something very early on in recovery. Said, wife or no wife, job or no job, you can get well if you want to. And I had exhausted all the excuses to go back drinking. I know in my heart of hearts that if I have one more excuse to pick up a drink, I haven't taken my last drink, because I'm not going to do the things necessary to attain and maintain my recovery. When adversity strikes, I lean towards the fellowship, not away from the fellowship, because the illness likes to live in isolation. So I hang on to, like dear life, to the fellowship and to my higher power, which gives me some sort of anchorage. So I've had those physical losses. I've had big financial losses, and also romantic losses. I was 38 years old when I was forced out of the family business, and I was petrified because at the time I could have been, I don't know, maybe 11 years sober, and I don't have any academic background, and I have no manual skills, nothing. And I just didn't know what to do when I was chucked out of the family business, or forced out of the family business. But it seemed that God had a different plan for me. And I don't mean this to stroke my ego, but I became quite popular within my home group in Gibraltar, and a lot of people encouraged me to go to Castle Craig in Scotland to do a course in addictions counselling. Now, I recall my first session there, and I just cried, and I threw my exercise book, and I said, I can't write. I hadn't written since I was 14 years old. However, I persevered, and I did my course in Castle Craig, and then I qualified as a counsellor and worked in the field for 18 years back here in Gibraltar. Something which I thought would never happen. I couldn't put two words together. So, yeah, that's all the adversities that have happened in my recovery. But the joys have also been very good. It's sort of like I've been able to make amends to my ex-wife. The greatest compliment I've ever received in Alcoholics Anonymous is, I mean, I was with her just a couple of months ago. I was in Leicester and in London, I think a month and a half ago, and she says, I recognize you physically, but mentally and emotionally, you're not the same human being that he said, why couldn't you be like this when we were together? And so I've tried to be emotionally present for that lady. She's very ill now, and I've been trying to be financially helpful as well. And with my eldest daughter, for the first 2 years, she used to tell me, it was the first 2 years of my recovery, she used to tell me, I hate you, I hate you. And as a parent, it used to cut me up something rotten, but I had to bite my tongue. And eventually, when she was 6 years old, she told me, Dad, you were going to throw me out a 4-story balcony. And I said, Dad was very ill. He's trying to get well now. That lady is 44 years old now. She works in NatWest in London. She calls me every morning at 9 o'clock to tell me she loves me, and also what's the plan for the day. And then most evenings, she does the same at 6 o'clock. That is totally priceless. That is totally priceless. But one of the persons I detested most was myself, even before my drinking. That's why I drank, because I wanted to change the way I felt about myself. And in my drinking, the primary repercussion of alcoholism, in my eyes, is that you're constantly living against conscience. So that was made acutely worse. I just hated the stink of me. And today I can say in all honesty, I've become a good friend of Harish's. Unlike me today. Unlike me today, because I don't display that antisocial behavior, and I try to be as honest as I can in my affairs. But it's taken a lot of, it's been quite painful. But they say, Bill W. writes, he says, pain is a touchstone for spiritual progress. And, you know, normally I have to suffer a lot before I change. You know, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and I didn't understand the lingo of Alcoholics Anonymous. When people were saying, you know, hand it over, let go, let God, you know, pray for the people you resent. I want to chop people's testicles off. I don't want to bloody pray for them. But I knew that my reprieve was running out and I just needed to do what I needed to do in order to get sober, you know. I'll be forever grateful to Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, one more thing that, you know, from somebody who couldn't, you know, when I first came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I used to cry out of embarrassment because when they used to pass how it works, I couldn't read it. I didn't know how to read, and I thought you guys would laugh at me for not being able to read. You know, from that boy who came in at 27 years old, like I said, you know, I qualified as an addictions counselor in Castle Craig. I've done, and it's not to brag, it's just to show you from where I came to where I've been able to do 3 TV programs on addiction. I've addressed a convention of 800 people. You know, these things were impossible. These things were impossible to imagine that I could do these things. And the higher powers put me in the right place at the right time, you know, to try to pass the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was also co-founder of the first Spanish meeting, the coast of Spain in 1991, in the coast of Spain, no, in the south of Spain in 1991. So the way I like to describe it is this: in active alcoholism, I was good for nothing. In recovery, I try to be good for nothing. I don't know if you understood that. And, you know, the other important component of my recovery, I could read a little bit when I first came in, and there was a pamphlet in Alcoholics Anonymous which said 15 points for getting sober. And one of the points was develop an attitude of gratitude. Now, if you've got to develop an attitude of gratitude, the implication is you don't have it because you're a selfish, self-centered little bastard, or at least I was. You know, so gratitude and acceptance has been the cornerstone of my foundation for Alcoholics Anonymous. So I'm just going to close with this. It's my favorite reading of the literature. And it says here, page 37 of as Bill sees it, it says, a full and thankful heart. One exercise that I practice is to try for a full inventory of my blessings, and then for a right acceptance of the many gifts that are mine, both temporal and spiritual. Here I try to achieve a state of joyful gratitude. When such a brand of gratitude is repeatedly affirmed and pondered, it can finally displace the natural tendency to congratulate myself on whatever progress I may have been unable to make in some areas of living. I try hard to hold fast to the truth that a full and thankful heart cannot entertain great conceits. When brimming with gratitude, one's heartbeat must surely result in outgoing love, the finest emotion we can ever know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harish. Thank you for sharing.